The old farmer sat alone in his small wooden house, staring at the empty fields outside. For years his land had grown quiet, his animals fewer, and his days long and lonely. He had no family to help him, no workers to share the load. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, he made a decision. He picked up a pen, scratched out a few words, and posted a job ad in town. It was a simple ad, almost too simple. Farm workers wanted, shelter and food included. He hoped maybe a few strong hands would come, maybe some travelers looking for work. He just wanted help with the soil, the fences, the crops, nothing more, nothing less. Days passed, and no one came. The farmer almost gave up hope, thinking no one cared about his little farm anymore. But on the fifth night, when the moon hung heavy and bright, something strange happened. He heard footsteps at his gate, soft but many. His old dog began to bark, restless, its hair standing up. The farmer grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. There, just beyond the gate, stood 5 tall figures cloaked in long dark robes, their faces hidden, their voices low. At first he thought they were wanderers, maybe thieves. But then one of them stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Please," she said, "we saw your ad. We beg for shelter." The farmer frowned, his eyes narrowing. The voice was soft, but it carried a strange tone, not like the voice of any woman he had heard before. He lifted the lantern higher, the light falling on their faces. And then he froze. They were not human. Their skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, shades of blue and silver. Their eyes were larger than his, filled with sorrow. And their faces, though beautiful, were marked by grief. They were aliens, 5 alien widows. The farmer's hand shook. He had never seen creatures like them before, not in all his years. He had heard rumors in town, whispers that strange beings sometimes passed through the night skies, but never had he believed it. Now they were at his gate, asking for shelter. One widow pulled back her hood fully, her silver hair shining in the lantern light. Her eyes were wet with tears. "Our husbands are gone," she said. "We have nowhere to go. We only ask for a place to rest, a roof, a chance to live." The farmer's heart pounded. He looked from one to another, seeing the same broken look in all their faces. They were tired, thin, desperate. Their hands trembled as they clutched their cloaks. But there was also something else in their eyes. Fear, not fear of him, but fear of being chased, fear of someone, or something, hunting them. The farmer stepped back, confused and uneasy. He had asked for farm workers, not for this. Not for 5 alien widows carrying secrets he could not yet see. He thought of his quiet farm, his empty fields, his simple life. And now this. Why had they come here of all places? He almost told them to leave, almost shut the gate. But the youngest widow suddenly fell to her knees. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If you turn us away, we will not survive the night." The farmer's chest tightened. Something in her words struck him deep. He was not a cruel man. He had lived a hard life, but he still had kindness left in him. He could not just let them die. Still, he could not understand why they had come to him. A lonely farmer. Why not the city? Why not the military? Why not anyone else? The night air grew colder, the wind carrying a strange hum. The widows glanced nervously at the sky as if expecting shadows to descend. The farmer noticed this, his unease growing. Clearly, these women were running from something dangerous. And if he let them in, that danger might follow. But in that moment, looking at their trembling forms, he made a choice. "Come in," he said quietly, opening the gate. The widows exchanged quick glances of relief and hurried inside. The farmer led them to the old barn, where straw and blankets lay unused. It was not much, but it was shelter. And for the first time in many nights, the farm was no longer silent. As he returned to his house, he could not shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The simple job that he had posted was no longer simple. It had brought strangers to his farm, widows from the stars, and with them, a shadow he could not yet see. He looked out into the night, the wind carrying faint echoes he could not name. Somewhere in the dark, Something was moving, something searching, and the farmer knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Asterisk. The barn was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of hay and dust. The farmer stood at the door with his lantern, watching the 5 alien widows settle inside. They sat close together, their cloaks wrapped tightly, their eyes darting toward every sound. It was clear they were not used to safety. They were used to running, hiding, fearing. The farmer cleared his throat, uneasy. He was a man of the land, used to silence, not used to strangers. And these were not just strangers. They were from another world. He asked the question burning in his mind. Why here? Why my farm? The eldest widow lifted her head, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Her voice was low, almost broken. Because you are not like the others, you asked for help, not power, not money. Her words were heavy, each one carrying pain. The farmer frowned, not understanding. I only needed workers, he said. I didn't ask for this. He pointed at them, at their glowing skin and sorrowful faces. You could have gone to the city, to people who understand your kind. The widows exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, another widow spoke, her voice trembling. No city would keep us safe. No army would hide us. We are widows. We are nothing in our world, less than nothing. The farmer narrowed his eyes, confused. What do you mean? The youngest widow, the one who had knelt at his gate, whispered the truth. In our world, widows are cursed. When our husbands die, our lives lose meaning. We are hunted, forgotten, erased. She clutched her cloak tighter, her body shaking. They call us burdens. They call us shadows. They strip us of home, food, and name. We had to flee, or we would vanish too. The farmer felt a chill crawl up his spine. He looked at their faces and saw the weight of grief. He thought of his own loneliness, his empty fields, his quiet nights, and for the first time, he felt their pain reach into his heart. But there was more in their eyes. Something darker, fear of the past and fear of the present. The farmer asked slowly, Who hunts you now? Who are you running from? The eldest widow's lips tightened. They will come. They always come. Widows are not allowed to live freely. We carry memories they fear. We carry truth they want buried. The farmer's lantern flickered, shadows crawling across the barn walls. He looked at them, at their trembling hands and haunted eyes. He had asked for workers to help him plow soil, fix fences, mend fields. Instead, he had invited danger into his home. Danger that wore the faces of 5 grieving women. The widows bowed their heads, as if ashamed. One of them whispered, We cannot pay you with gold. We cannot give you riches. All we can offer is labor, hands that will work until they break. Her voice cracked with desperation. Please do not send us away. Give us a place to rest, even if only for a little while. The farmer felt his chest tighten. He remembered the words of the youngest widow. If you turn us away, we will not survive the night. He saw the same truth now in all their faces. They had nowhere else, no one else. Still, doubt gnawed at him. If he let them stay, he could be marked. If their hunters came, his farm could burn. He thought of his quiet life and wondered if it was already lost. The moment they stepped onto his land, before he could answer, the widows suddenly grew tense. Their eyes flicked toward the barn roof. The farmer froze, following their gaze. He heard it too, the faint hum in the night sky. Low, steady, unnatural. The eldest widow whispered sharply, They are searching. The farmer's lantern trembled in his hand. They? Who? He demanded, though his voice cracked. The widows said nothing, only huddled together, pulling their cloaks tighter, as if to vanish in the hay. The sound faded after a moment, leaving silence heavy and sharp. But the farmer knew now. This was not some quiet mercy. Taking them in would not be simple. Danger hovered in the skies, ready to fall upon his farm. He looked at them again, 5 broken lives staring back at him. Widows with nowhere to go, widows cursed in their world, widows hunted across the stars. And he, a simple farmer, was the only one standing between them in the dark. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You can stay," he said, "but you will work. You will earn your shelter." It was the only way he could convince himself he was not a fool. The widows nodded quickly, their relief almost painful to see. They did not care if they worked until their hands bled. They only cared that for one night, they would not be turned away. As the farmer left the barn, he felt the air shift around him. The night was no longer peaceful, no longer his. His farm had become something else. A hiding place, a secret, a trap waiting to be sprung. He blew out the lantern and stood in the dark, listening to the silence, but it was not silence anymore. It was waiting, waiting for the storm he knew was coming. The next morning, the farmer rose before the sun, as he always did. His life had always been the same. Wake early, tend the animals, work the soil, eat alone, sleep in silence. But now, things were different. When he opened his door, he saw movement in the barn, shadows bending and shifting as the widows stirred from their uneasy rest. He carried a bucket of water inside, expecting them to still look fragile and weak. But instead, he froze. They were already working without being told. One was sweeping the barn floor with a broken broom. Another was carrying heavy buckets of hay with surprising strength. The youngest was softly singing to calm the frightened animals, and even the old cow, usually stubborn, leaned closer to her voice. The farmer watched quietly. Unsettled, they moved with grace, but their eyes never relaxed. Even as they worked, they kept glancing at the doors, the roof, the windows. As if danger could crawl through any crack, he cleared his throat and said, "If you stay here, you must follow my rules. No wandering off, no talking to strangers in town." The widows nodded, grateful, but he could see the fear in their faces. It was clear. They wanted no strangers, no town, only safety. For a few days, life on the farm grew almost normal. The widows worked hard, stronger and faster than he expected. They mended fences, hauled water, tended crops with careful hands, and though their movements were silent, there was sadness in every step. Their laughter never came, their voices never rose higher than a whisper. Yet, despite their grief, the farmer found himself watching them more closely. There was something about them he could not explain. Their eyes held secrets, their hands bore scars not made by farm work, and sometimes at night he swore he saw their skin glow faintly, like moonlight clinging to them. The neighbors began to notice. One old man passing by stopped at the fence and called out, "Farmer, I see new hands working your land. Where did you find them?" The farmer gave no answer, only nodded and sent him on his way, but he felt unease grow in his chest. If the widows were discovered, questions would follow, questions he had no answers for. One night, as the moon rose high, the farmer woke to a strange sound. Not the wind, not the cry of an owl. It was something heavier. He grabbed his lantern and shotgun and stepped outside. The farm looked still, but he felt the air thicken. His dog barked and ran toward the barn, teeth bared. Inside, he found the widows huddled together, their eyes wide. "What's wrong?" he demanded. The eldest widow raised a shaking finger toward the roof. "Something is here," she whispered. The farmer looked up, and his blood ran cold. A shadow moved across the beams, silent but fast. It slipped through the cracks like smoke, a dark shape with no clear form. The dog snarled, snapping at the air, but its teeth met nothing. The farmer fired his shotgun, the blast echoing through the night. The shadow burst apart like mist, vanishing into the rafters. Silence fell again, but the widows trembled. "That was only a scout," one said, her voice breaking. "They are searching for us. They are closer than we thought." The farmer gripped his shotgun tighter. He had fought wolves before, thieves too, but never shadows that moved without flesh. He felt his simple farm life slipping. Further away now, every corner held fear. Every sound was a warning. The next morning, he tried to work the soil as usual, but the widows were restless, their eyes fixed on the skies. They whispered in their strange tongue when they thought he wasn't listening. He caught words that chilled him. Hunters, trackers, war. At night, he could not sleep. He sat by his window staring at the barn, and sometimes he thought he saw figures moving along the tree line. Not animals, not neighbors, but tall, still shapes watching from afar. When he blinked, they were gone, but his heart told him they had been there. One evening, as he finished feeding the animals, the youngest widow approached him. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. "They will not stop," she said. "The more we hide, the closer they come." The farmer swallowed hard. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice rough. The widow looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Hunters sent to erase us. If they find us, they will erase you too." The farmer felt his chest grow heavy. He thought of his quiet ad, the one he had written, so simply, "Farm workers wanted," and now here he was, standing in the shadow of a storm he never asked for. But the widows were here, and their fear had become his burden. That night, as the stars burned bright, the farmer stood outside, shotgun in hand. The farm was no longer just soil and fences. It had become a battlefield waiting to awaken. And in the distance, beyond the hills, he thought he saw a faint light, moving in the sky, not a star, not a plane, but something searching, something drawing closer. The widows did not sleep, and neither did he, for all of them knew. Shadows had found their way to the farm, and soon the real storm would come. The night was heavy with silence. The farmer sat at his table, his shotgun, leaning against the wall. The widows were in the barn, but he could not rest. His heart told him something was coming, something that would shatter the fragile peace of his farm. The dog began to growl first, low and sharp. The farmer rose quickly, lantern in one hand, shotgun in the other. Outside, the air felt different, colder, thicker. The barn doors creaked as the widows rushed out, their eyes wide with fear. "They are here," the eldest whispered, her voice breaking. Then he saw them, figures emerging from the tree line, tall and armored, their eyes glowing faintly red. There were 3 at first, then 5, then more. They moved like hunters, silent but certain. Alien bounty hunters sent across the stars to drag the widows back. The farmer's chest tightened. He was only a man with a shotgun facing enemies from another world. But the widows clutched each other, trembling, and in that moment he knew he could not turn his back. He stepped forward, placing himself between the widows and the hunters. "Leave this place," he shouted, though his voice shook. The hunters did not answer. One raised a strange weapon, glowing with blue fire. The farmer fired his shotgun, the blast tearing through the night. The nearest hunter stumbled, armor cracking. The others hissed, their glowing eyes locking on him. The widows screamed. But something changed in them. Their sorrow twisted into fury. One widow raised her hands, light bursting from her palms. A wave of energy struck a hunter, sending him crashing into the dirt. Another widow grabbed a fallen stick, her body glowing faintly as she swung it with unnatural strength. The farmer could hardly believe what he saw. They were not weak, not helpless. They were warriors hidden. Beneath grief still, the hunters were stronger, their weapons sharp and deadly. One fired at the barn, flames sparking against the wooden walls. The animals cried out in terror. The farmer's blood boiled. This was his land, his home. He fired again and again, each shot echoing like thunder. 2 hunters fell, but more stepped forward. The youngest widow screamed as a hunter grabbed her arm. The farmer ran without thinking, slamming the butt of his gun into the creature's head. It released her but swung its blade toward him. The widow raised her hand, a shield of light bursting to life just in time. The blade struck the shield, sparks flying. Together, farmer and widow pushed the hunter back until it fell, unmoving. The air smelled of smoke and fire. The widows fought desperately, their powers raw and unsteady. The farmer fought beside them. His hands blistered from the shotgun's heat. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Not peaceful, not safe, but alive. The simple ad he had written had brought him to this battlefield. And now he was no longer just a farmer. He was a defender. But the battle was not over. More hunters crept from the trees, their eyes fixed on the widows. The eldest shouted, "They will not stop. They will keep coming until we are gone." The farmer's mind raced. If this continued, his farm would burn and all of them would die. He made a decision. "Get to the barn," he shouted. "Hold the line there." The widows obeyed, their powers flaring in the darkness as they pushed back the hunters. The farmer stood at the doorway, shotgun ready. Every blast echoed across the fields, every scream carried into the night sky. Finally, as the moon sank lower, the last hunter fell, its body dissolved into smoke, leaving only scorch marks on the soil. The silence returned, heavy and sharp. The widows collapsed against the barn walls, their bodies shaking. The farmer stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his shotgun nearly empty. The farm was scarred, the barn burned in places, the ground littered with ash, but they were alive. For now the widows looked at him with new eyes, not just as a farmer, but as someone who had stood against death beside them. The youngest whispered, "Why would you fight for us? We are nothing to you." The farmer swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Because this is my land," he said, "and anyone who seeks to harm those under my roof will face me." The widows lowered their heads, their grief mixing with gratitude. But the farmer knew what they all felt in their hearts. This was only the first attack. The hunters had found them, and more would come, stronger, faster, relentless. As dawn broke, the farmer walked through the fields, shotgun in hand. Smoke rose from the earth, animals cried weakly, and the widows tried to mend what they could. But he knew deep in his bones that this was only the beginning of war. And in the distant sky, where the stars faded with the morning light, something stirred, something far larger than hunters. Something that would one day reach his farm and test everything he thought he was. The farm was quiet again, but it was not the same quiet as before. The ground still bore the marks of battle. Black ash where hunters had fallen. Smoke rising from broken fences. The barn's roof had holes where fire had burned through. The animals were restless, stamping and crying in the dark. The farmer stood among the ruins, his shotgun heavy in his hands. He had defended his land before from wolves and thieves, but never from armored shadows carrying weapons that burned like stars. This was not just his fight anymore. It belonged to the widows too, and they were no ordinary refugees. At dawn, when the air was still cool, the farmer walked into the barn. The widows sat together on the straw, their faces pale with exhaustion. For the first time he saw not only grief in their eyes, but also shame. They had hidden something from him, something heavy, and now the weight of it filled the barn like smoke. The farmer's voice was rough. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Why do they hunt you? Why won't they let you live?" The widows looked at each other, their silence long and painful. Finally, the eldest rose to her feet, her cloak torn from the fight. She stood tall, her face lined with sorrow, but also strength. "You deserve to know," she said softly. "You fought for us when no one else would." She stepped closer, her eyes dark and deep. "We were not only wives," she whispered. "Our husbands were not just soldiers." The farmer frowned, gripping his shotgun tighter. "What do you mean?" The eldest widow took a deep breath, her words slow and heavy. "Our husbands were commanders, leaders in the Great War. They knew secrets no one else did. And when they died, those secrets passed to us, to their widows." The farmer's chest tightened. "Secrets?" he asked. The youngest widow nodded, her voice trembling. "Plans, codes, knowledge that could end wars or start new ones. Knowledge too dangerous for widows to carry. They want to erase us, so those secrets vanish forever." The barn grew colder, the air pressing down on him. The farmer stared at them in disbelief. He had thought they were broken women running from cruel tradition, but they carried something far greater, something the galaxy itself wanted buried. The eldest widow's voice grew firm. "We came here because Earth is small, quiet, forgotten. They thought no one would look for us here, but they found us anyway." The farmer turned away, pacing the barn. His mind raced. His small farm had become a hiding place for knowledge worth killing for. He slammed his fist against the wooden wall. "Do you realize what danger you brought to my home? To my land?" The widows bowed their heads, their voices weak. "We know," whispered another, "but we had nowhere else to go. We had no choice." The farmer stared at them, anger boiling. But when his eyes met theirs, he saw the truth. They had lost everything. They were hunted not for crimes they had committed, but for what they carried unwillingly. And yet, in their silence, he also saw a spark, a strength that refused to die. The farmer exhaled slowly, the fight draining from his chest. "You should have told me," he muttered. The eldest widow nodded. "We feared you would turn us away, and if you did, we would be dead already." The farmer rubbed his face, tired and torn. His simple life had been ripped open by secrets older and darker than his soil, but he could not undo what had been done. The widows were here, and their burden was now his as well. That night, as the widows rested, the farmer sat outside by the fire. The stars glimmered above, bright and cold. He looked at them with new eyes. Before, they had only been distant lights, far away and meaningless. Now he knew. Wars were fought out there, deaths written across those stars. And 5 widows from that war had chosen his farm to be their shelter. He thought of the attack, the hunters, the shadows that had slipped across his fields. If they returned with greater numbers, could he hold them off again? Could he defend not only his farm, but the secrets the widows carried? The youngest widow sat beside him quietly, her silver hair glowing in the firelight. "You wonder if you can trust us," she said softly. The farmer did not answer, but his silence was enough. She lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "We did not choose this either. We only wished to live, to work, to breathe without chains." The farmer looked at her, and for the first time, he saw more than grief. He saw a will to survive, to fight, and he realized something. Perhaps he needed them as much as they needed him. He had lived in silence, alone with his land, but now he was not alone. Now, the soil carried more than crops. It carried purpose. When the fire died low, he made his choice. He stood and said, "If they come again, we fight together. If your secrets are worth killing for, then they are worth protecting too." The widows heard his words and lifted their heads. For the first time, he saw light in their eyes, not just sorrow. And though the night was still heavy with danger, the farm no longer felt like a place of death. It felt like a place where survival could grow. But deep in his heart, the farmer knew one thing clearly. The hunters would return, and when they did, they would not stop at shadows. They would bring fire, steel, and armies, and his farm would become a battlefield again, this time for secrets that could shake the stars themselves. The days after the attack were heavy with silence. The widows worked hard to repair the fences, patch the barn, and calm the animals, but even as they moved, their eyes stayed sharp, always scanning the sky, always listening to the wind. The farmer watched them, his heart torn between pride and fear. They were no longer strangers on his land. They were part of it now, tied to his soil, tied to his fate. Every night, he sat awake by the fire, shotgun across his knees. The words of the eldest widow echoed in his head. "They will come again." Stronger, he knew she was right, and deep down, he knew he could not fight them as he was. Not just a farmer with a gun, he had to choose, stand as he always had, or become something more. One morning, before the sun rose, he walked the fields. The land stretched wide and quiet, rows of crops, old fences, and the barn standing scarred from battle. This had always been his life, simple and steady, but now it was no longer enough. The soil would not protect him, the crops would not shield him. If the widows were to survive, if his land was to endure, he had to turn this farm into a fortress. He gathered tools, wood, and wire. The widows joined him without hesitation, their hands steady, their strength surprising. They built barricades at the fences, sharpened posts, dug trenches along the edges of the fields. The eldest widow carved strange symbols into the wood, glowing faintly. When touched wards, she explained, to slow the hunters, to hide us from their eyes. The farmer nodded, though unease prickled his skin. Magic or not, he would take any defense he could get. At night he trained. The widows showed him weapons salvaged from the fallen hunters, blades that hummed with energy, strange rifles that burned with blue fire. The farmer was clumsy at first, his hands more used to plows than alien steel. But he learned quickly. He trained until his arms ached, until sweat soaked his shirt, until his breath came, ragged. The widows watched him with quiet respect. He was no soldier, but he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. The youngest widow stood beside him one evening as he practiced with the energy blade. Her voice was soft but steady. "You change," she said. "You are not the same man who opened the gate that night." The farmer did not stop swinging. The blade. "I cannot be that man anymore," he said. "That man would be dead already." The widows nodded, for they understood. They too had changed. Grief had carved them, but survival had shaped them sharper still. The neighbors began to whisper. They saw fences reinforced with spikes, strange lights glowing at night, shadows moving in the fields. One man asked the farmer directly, "What are you hiding on that land?" The farmer only stared back, his silence colder than words. The man left uneasy, but the farmer knew curiosity would spread. If the hunters didn't bring danger, his neighbor's suspicions surely would. Still, he did not stop. Every day the farm grew less like a home and more like a stronghold. The barn became a shelter, the fields became walls, and the widows, once cloaked in grief, now stood taller, moving with strength, preparing for the storm they all knew was coming one evening. As the sun bled into the horizon, the farmer stood with the eldest widow on the hill. From there he could see the whole farm, glowing faintly under the wards. She turned to him and asked, "Why do you do this? Why risk everything? For us?" The farmer's face was hard, his eyes fixed on the land. "Because this is my soil," he said, "and anything that sets foot on it, whether man, beast, or hunter, will answer to me." The widow studied him quietly, then bowed her head. "In our world," she whispered, "men like you do not exist anymore." That night the farmer dreamed of fire. He saw the hunters return, not as shadows but as armies. He saw the barn collapse, the fields burn, the widows dragged screaming into the dark. And when he woke, sweat covering his skin, he knew the dream was not just fear. It was a warning. The next day, he spoke to the widows, his voice steady. "When they come again, it will not be small, it will not be scouts or hunters, it will be war." The widows looked at him with solemn eyes. "Yes," the eldest said, "and when it comes, you will not face it alone." The farmer looked at them. These women who had come to his gate broken and afraid. Now they stood beside him, warriors shaped by sorrow. And he realized something. His choice had already been made. He was not only protecting them, he was standing with them. Their fight was now his fight, their survival, his survival, as the stars rose that night, brighter and sharper than before. The farmer stood at the edge of his fields, energy blade at his side. The land was quiet, but he felt the storm building beyond the horizon. Hunters, armies, shadows. They would all come, and when they did, they would not find a lonely farmer. They would find a man who had chosen to stand, chosen to fight, chosen to turn his soil into a battlefield, and in that choice, his life had changed forever. The night was darker than any. Before, the air was heavy, pressing down on the farm like a warning. The dog barked endlessly at the tree line, its growls sharp and restless. The widows stood ready in the barn, their cloaks gone, their faces set with fire, and the farmer walked. The fields, his shotgun across his back, the alien blade in his hand. He had prepared for this moment. The fences were lined with spikes, the trenches filled with traps, the wards glowing faintly along the posts. Every corner of his land was ready to fight. Yet his heart pounded because tonight he knew the storm would fall. The sound came first, a low hum that shook the earth, then lights split the sky, burning red and blue as ships descended beyond the hills. The ground trembled under the weight of engines. The widows stiffened, their eyes wide. "They have come in numbers," whispered the eldest. "This is no hunt. This is an army." The farmer's jaw tightened. He had no army of his own. Only 5 widows and the soil beneath his boots. But he had made his choice. This farm would not fall without a fight. The first wave came swift, Armored hunters marching through the fields, weapons glowing like fire. They struck the wards, and the symbols blazed bright, slowing their advance. The widows raised their hands, energy flashing like lightning. Bolts of light struck the hunters, tearing holes in their ranks. The farmer fired his shotgun, every blast echoing across the hills. When the shells ran low, he lifted the alien blade, its hum sharp in the night. He fought like a man possessed, swinging with fury, striking down those who crossed his soil. The barn shook as beams of fire struck it. The animals cried out, fear filling the night air. The youngest widow shielded them with a wall of light, her body trembling as the force burned against her. Still, she stood, firm, refusing to let the flames through. The farmer saw her struggling. He ran to her side, blocking a hunter with the blade. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and in her gaze he saw not fear but determination. Together, they pushed back the enemy, step by step. But the waves kept coming. Dozens fell, but dozens more poured through the trees. The soil was soaked with ash and smoke. The farmer's arms burned with pain, but he did not stop. Every strike, every shot, every breath was his answer to the hunters. This land was his, and he would not give it up. The eldest widow raised her arms high, chanting in her strange tongue. The ground itself seemed to tremble, vines bursting from the soil, wrapping around the hunter's legs. They hissed and struggled, but the earth held them fast. The farmer's traps snapped shut, spears and wires tearing into armor. The farm had become a weapon, every corner biting back. Then came the leader, a figure taller than the rest, armor dark as night, eyes burning with cruel fire. It stepped forward, cutting through the chaos. Its voice was cold, echoing like iron. Give us the widows and we will spare you, human. The farmer spat into the dirt. They are under my roof, he said, his voice rough but steady. And nothing under my roof belongs to you, the leader snarled and charged. The clash shook the field. Blade against blade, fire against fire. The farmer's hands blistered, his body aching. But he did not falter. The widows gathered behind him, their voices rising, their powers weaving together. Light burst across the farm, brighter than the moon. It struck the leader, driving it back, its armor cracking. With one final cry, the farmer swung his blade. The leader fell, dissolving into smoke, its army breaking without command. The remaining hunters fled into the night, their shadows vanishing beyond the trees. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire and the farmer's ragged breath. The widows fell to their knees, exhausted, their faces pale. The farmer stood above them, his blade dimming, his shotgun empty. The farm was scarred, fences broken, soil torn apart, but it still stood, and so did they. The eldest widow looked at him, tears in her eyes. You saved us, she whispered. You gave us what no world, no people, no army ever did. Shelter. The farmer looked out at the dawn breaking across the fields. His land was no longer just soil and crops. It was a battlefield, a sanctuary, a place where the hunted found hope. He did not know what would come next. More hunters, more battles, maybe even war across the stars. But he knew this. He would stand with them. He would fight beside them, because this was his farm, and anyone who tried to take it would find not a lonely man, but a wall of earth, fire, and human will. As the sun rose, the widows stood with him, their shadows long across the scarred fields. The farm had survived the night. It was no longer only a shelter. It was proof that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, a farmer and 5 widows could stand together and refuse to bow. And so the story of one man's job ad, written in loneliness, became something greater. A spark that might one day set the stars themselves ablaze.